Hey, good night, everyone. I hope everybody's doing well, blessed, and enjoying family. As always, thank you, everyone, for everyone's words, wishes, prayers, time, as love and support you guys extend and share with me. From the heart, I thank everyone. Also, do please like, share, and subscribe and help get the message a little bit out there more. Thank you. Well, to get into the story, I want to touch on today, right? I've been asked numerous times to talk, right, on personal experience I had with ABs or just woods, you know, blacks, norteños, NRs, NFs, and I always stand and try to stay away from, right? And it's not because there ain't nothing interested to expand the message on, right? But I do it out of respect for the sense that I don't know their inner works, right? I don't know their politics. I don't know what goes on behind the whatever, you know. And the last thing I want is to disrespect. But sitting down and analyzing, I do want to touch on a couple personal experiences, with different factions. But I want to make something real clear beforehand, right? By this, in no sense, way, or form, am I trying to imply I know the inner works, their get down, nor am I trying to disrespect. You know, I do this with the utmost of respect as I do everything since I've been on here, right? Anyways, today I want to talk about someone I known since I was a child, right? It's a few years older than me. I remember I was in first, he was like in fourth, I believe, in elementary. And, I always, since as far as I could remember, I always been too fast for my age, right? And reasons, well, the common ones we all have, right? But nevertheless, I known him. I grew up in South Park, and he lived passing the freeway, which is a couple blocks from where I grew up, right? And nevertheless, even though at this time, I was into sports. To be sincere, the last thing through my head was game banging, right? And but I always been a troublemaker, point blank, right? I always been one looking for trouble, like to fight, but I always been into sports. That was my thing, right? Nevertheless, you know, around fifth grade is when I really got into game banging. As you guys know my story, I'm not gonna say I got pushed into it, but it basically came to me, right? And I went in full force, right? Full of hate, and things took a turn, right? Now I knew Jason at this time, right? For for different things we were doing on the calles, right? And then from juvenile hall, we would always see each other in juvenile hall, mainly because, again, I was a troublemaker, right? They popped that door and it was time to knuckle up. Sincerely, that's why I was always in the pause and always slammed, And nevertheless, from troublemakers, it's just funny how things just blend in, right? They start organizing, for example, I remember when I went to YA, you know, he was there too in YA. and he was a whole different person, sincerely, right? And of course, I was too. He was on his trip of white power, well, for those that have been in why, I was in my trip, right? And we got out, we did a couple things together, we pulled a couple things together, and, later on he would get arrested. He wouldn't get arrested for nothing, in my opinion, right? That's something like, nothing's positive, but at least, that falls in the norms, right? I don't know what happened in his house again, nor am I trying to put, but something happened to the point where he had to stab his dad, right? And he got arrested. He went in, and I don't know, maybe a month, 2 months later is when I caught my case. And up from the county, I've already heard about NLRs, right? Nazi Lowriders, but in my county at least, there was about six of them, just in APOD. And they were on a mission. They were definitely on a mission, which again it's part of, right? But I want to touch on is, from the streets and everything, how it manifests once you hit jail, right? Prison more so. You see, he would head out before me to Quilmas, right? To San Quentin. And then I would head out there, and again, we weren't like buddy, friends. We just knew of each other, right, since kids. And when I got there, at least when I got there, my homeboy Flaco had the backboard, and my cousin Travieso had the front board, and but we're still always slam, right, in West Block. And the guy that was running around was Jason. By this time, he already had his placazo, right? They called him Barney from NLR. And he had the bag. And just being sincere, he had the bag while we were there. And, well, they received me, I'll just leave it at that. Proper. And he was able to run everywhere. Me, I'll be sincere with you. We had a couple melees in San Quentin, one on the third and fourth tier. And man, usually you go in not minding everything, but that fall, believe me, it sticks to you, to your head, right, while it's going down. But I used to climb the tiers through the outside, right? And, I was nobody. Again, I was just somebody new. And with us, well, we have it clear, we're not to deal with no other races, right? But at this moment, it was just raza or whites, Nevertheless, him being an NLR, again, he was he was dealing with everyone, you know, with everyone, blacks, Asians, whatever, And I pulled him over, not like to correct himself, but just kind of like, hey, it's gonna eventually hit the fan, and you shouldn't be doing this because it's gonna reach someone's ears, and it's a no-no. But he was in that strive of making feria. I'm not gonna knock him for it because I'll be sincere. I was, like I mentioned, I hit San Quentin, and I was reckless too, right? But more so with my actions of what I was doing, lifting my hand for, you know, which my next episode's gonna touch on my celly, my first celly, Raul, right? The Pili from Riverside. Anyways, getting back to this, I guess why I'm touching on Barnes, right, is because it was a fool. You know, some things happened there with a couple brothers from Oakland, and he went at it with knives, right, to collect his feria, his money, and he took off. You know, after he left, you know, it just don't stop to amaze me how we could belong to any faction, but it's ruled under the same people, right? Same type of mentality. For example, the minute he took off, there was already rumors on by his own people on sending dirt up with him, right, to follow him. But you know, it's when the Nazis, lowriders, they had their push. You know, they were doing their thing in CDC. There's no one could take that from them, right? They were the riders, point blank. You know, they were putting in a lot of work. You know, throughout my time, you would hear, you know, you would hear of Barnes. Another one I would hear a lot of was Bullet from Orange County. And, you know, I don't want to make this too long. But within time, I hit St. Quentin Shoe. And in St. Quentin Shoes is when I ran across Bullet and he was held up with Barney, right? They were cellies. And at this time, they had an open war with the skinheads. You know, everything had already hit the fan where AB was basically pushing away from Nazi lowriders and going with skinheads, right? And you know, them two fools, every yard, I don't BS you around, every yard, they would go down out and they would go at it. That Bullet and Barney, they would literally go at it with skinheads and never fail, you know. And even if they went out one day, 2 days, they would go down. I would till later I would find out it's cause you know, arrogance, pride from all of them that started young, right? That got into Nazi lowriders. Basically, they started going against the green, right? They started going against the abejas, and they wanted their necks. The point of the story is, you know, maybe a year, right? I seen this play out with them. You know, it was constantly war with them and skinheads or other woods, and they were holding their ground, right? But just the betrayal, it's in every race, right? It's amongst all of us, even blacks, you know. And again, I don't mean no disrespect, but it's a constant, excuse me, constant turn on, you know, snaking on the next man. That's what person is. You know, there's no way of sugarcoating it. You see what happened while I was there, right? Still with them. I remember we went out to committee one day, and I got to talk to Jason or Barney, right? And I told him like, hey fool, and what are you gonna do? By this time that I'm speaking to him from '97 that I seen him in Quilmas, he had picked up life for the AV. And then I guess when things started with Nazi Lowriders and AV, he had stayed loyal to his Ranfla, to the Nazi Lowriders. So he went against AB, you could say that, right? So basically, he was in the hat. There's just no buts or ifs going against the AV when it comes to the woodpile in California. Just being sincere. It's it's like telling Sureños for us to fall underneath someone else. It's just not gonna happen. If tomorrow a new structure of camaradas came out, believe me, minority will maintain where we're at now. There wouldn't be no change. It's part of loyalty, right? Or the loyalty that we follow to the bone. Now, an abeja came by. This AB member came by and he shot a wheeler, right? Into 7 block. He shot it to T, to Toro. And basically, he wanted to know what was the problem, right? Why weren't the WOPA allowed to program on the concrete yards? And basically, T asked me just to reply, under his name. And it was Bullet and Barney, right? Every time they go out there, they lay his yard down. And basically, this abeja put the directive out there and told T to tell one of them to. He didn't even say a name, right? He just said tell one of them to, you know, riders or whatever he called them, that I won't clear their name, but they have to take the one. For example, I'm gonna clear your name. You have to take your celly out. Remember, this is a person you giving everything. You got put on the hat to ride with together and everything. And unfortunately, Toto told Bullet, right? And Bullet ended up clipping Barney. You know, up to the point where supposedly Bullet was in the clear. Bullet was gonna go home. But we do dwell ourselves inside to believe that we're smart. Even when we climb that ladder, we're in certain places that we're above, mentally at least, right? And seeing things. And this is a perfect example that nah. Bullet moved on Barney. And that was the end of the homeboy, right? His career stuck in prison for life. And of course, not gonna say it's sad, but someone moves all your life to see it play out. Again, I don't know the inner politics. I don't know what or how they play them things out, to be sincere. But nevertheless, they made it real clear, still clear. It's the same when it comes to dope fiending and rocking people to sleep. You see, Bullet would eventually get out, and eventually, the AB will move on him permanently. For those that know who I'm talking about, know the story. I know I ain't the suitable one to speak, right? You see, I could speak more, but again, my respects. But it's just the way things are. The message I want to put out in this, if I can, right, is we'll go back to loyalty. We don't even have to mention an organization. We'll just say the four that are in power play by the same mentality. So I guess this message is going out as a whole. Again, if you got somebody in your ear talking about, hey, that's where the hardcore loyalty, that's where real comrades are made. That's where you're gonna meet solid people. Don't fall for it. Don't waste your life for it. I do understand, for example, me and Barney, we were meant to go down that road, right? Of destruction. You know, he wasn't alive for He had that first 8 years and he did whatever he did to catch life. At the moment, I was a double lifer. So what I'm trying to say is, it goes straight for everyone. Prison ain't nothing but a waste of time, heartache, and a bunch of downtime. Be smart. I know it's easy. Believe me, I was a youngster where them stories, leave you like a little kid in Toys R Us, right? But with so much out there, it ain't the place no more. But again, for those that are mistaking my words, if you're there, boogie. You know, I, you can think whatever of me, whatever you want me to be. The one thing I'm not though is a Theo. I completed my mission to the fullest. You know, 23 years, 11 months straight, 14 and some months in the shoe straight, feds, Mexican prisons, federal, state. You know, I completed my mission to the fullest. So if you're already there, complete it. But if you're not there, just pay attention to what others have to share in their experience. I hope I'm able to make sense. If not, please let me know and I'll stick to what I've been sticking to, right? Which is my knowledge. Hope everybody's blessed again. Saludos. Please stay true to yourself and loyal to loved ones.